Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Thursday morning, June 4th. Is it? June 4th, 7:15 a.m., and the sun is coming up, and we are talking about yet another crisis in the Trump administration, and a very important one because it shows just how far in today's political climate, your opposition will go to make you look bad to the point of nuclear holocaust? Could be. So, we're going to talk about the recent House vote attempting to restrict President Trump's ability to continue military operations against Iran. Now, if you listen to the mainstream coverage, you will hear that this is a constitutional issue. You will hear that Congress is reclaiming its war powers. You will hear that lawmakers are trying to prevent another endless Middle Eastern war. Was it 3 months now? And I think they're asking the wrong question. They're asking the right question for themselves, the wrong question for us. The real question isn't whether Congress has war powers. The real question is whether Congress is trying to win the conflict with Iran or whether it is more focused on beating Donald Trump. Before anybody starts the screaming, which will not be most of the people watching this, let's be clear. I am not saying every member of Congress has the same dark motivation. Some probably do have constitutional concerns. Some genuinely oppose military intervention. Some are friends of the Iranians. Some are friends of the European Union. Some are worried about gas prices and inflation because it's election time and that's the only reason they worry about it. Some are probably motivated by domestic policy. The problem isn't necessarily their motives. The problem is what they're not talking about or what they're not seeing because there's a giant strategic blind spot sitting right in the middle of the debate, and that blind spot is called Israel. For the last several weeks, we've watched members of Congress debate presidential authority, excessive power, and fuel prices, etc. But very few people seem willing to discuss what happens if the current Iranian regime survives this confrontation intact, which it's going to if Congress has anything to say about it, and decides to rebuild its nuclear program, which supposedly it's been doing the entire time we've been having this peace process. And that's where the things start to get interesting again. I hate using that word, but there you go. Because Congress appears to be operating under the assumption that reducing American pressure automatically reduces the likelihood of war. That sounds reasonable, I guess. The problem is that Israel has a vote on this, not because they own the government, Mr. Rothschild. I know they're out there. The problem is, and unlike many members of Congress, Israeli leaders have been remarkably consistent on one issue for decades. A hostile Iranian nuclear weapon capability is unacceptable. It is not desirable, it is not concerning, it is unacceptable, and that if they have to, they will take it to them themselves. The position has survived changes in the Israeli government and changes in political coalitions nonstop. The one thing that always remains is if Iran gets the bomb, Iran will be on fire within 5 minutes. It is one of the few constants in Middle Eastern strategy and is now a major concern among the other Arab countries. But we'll talk about that at another time. If America is forced to cut and run, what happens to our Arab allies that have been getting, just as Kuwait was hit the other day again? So let's think through the incentives, okay? Suppose Iran survives. Suppose negotiations fail. Suppose the regime concludes its greatest mistake was not getting a nuclear weapon sooner and it contracts with the Chinese or whoever else, secretly, of course, because China would never supply weapons to the Iranians as it did the other day. Would anyone really be shocked if Tehran made nuclear development its number one national security priority? After all, people are now afraid that they can hit Europe with a nuclear weapon, which they never did, nor did they ever hit Europe with a missile at all. They shot one into the ocean in toward Diego Garcia, but it wasn't. It was just shot into the ocean to show you how far they could go with a stripped down model of a missile with no payload. Think about that, dummies. I mean, you don't have to go to Harvard, where you should, to figure that part out. Okay? Countries with nuclear weapons are much harder to pressure. Whether we like logic or not, it is easy to understand how Iranian leaders could arrive at that conclusion. And if they do, what do the Israelis do? Because if the United States has now hindered under war powers, which we'll discuss again as to if you're going to talk about war powers and you want to curtail military operations, where were they during Afghanistan and Iraq, right? Where was the pressing need in Afghanistan and Iraq to let that drag out forever? Where is the pressing need to remove the Americans or to have this vote while the Americans are involved in a long and drawn out Middle Eastern style peace negotiation? You are taking the military option away during a peace process. So you are guaranteeing there will be no peace with the Iranians. That vote that occurred yesterday guarantees there will be no peace with Iran. Doesn't even have to go to the Senate because for the rest of you, here's the clue. You go to the Congress. It now has to go to the Senate to vote. If it passes the Senate, it goes to the president who says no. And then it has to go back to the Congress and Senate to get a supermajority, which is 2/3 of a vote to go through. This is being done specifically to fuck up any peace negotiations, to make them impossible to do. That is the level of the mindset of the leaders of the opposition in the United States. It's embarrassing, it's dangerous, and people should mark down who voted for this and kick them out of office too. You're playing nuclear chicken. If we never played nuclear chicken before, we are getting ready to play it now. And it's worst case, not saying it's going to actually happen 100%. You are now giving them, because if there's another situation later on where we have to do this and there are enough Democrats in Congress, the Iranians will, number one, think we'll get them to do the same shit again, and we won't even try to have a peace process. Okay. So back to where we are here with Israel. Once we are gone, all the leashes come off of the Israeli armed forces. And people are like, well, we own, they own us anyway, or blah, blah. All this stupid anti-Jew shit, which is so tiresome at this point in the game. Yeah, so they are going to decide what they want to do. They will not leave Lebanon until the last Hezbollah guy draws breath. And then they will leave because where they are is kind of indefensible. They'll probably roll down and be a little bit further south. But then they aren't going to go away because Lebanon doesn't want them to in their heart of hearts. All right. So let's get back to this war powers deal and why this is a total farce. Okay. Most war powers disputes happen when a president is starting a conflict or expanding one. Vietnam, right? Also not a war. Afghanistan and Iraq, which we already said, started out under something, but then we realized there was nothing there, and then we just decided never to leave. Okay. But so when you're starting a conflict or expanding one, but that's not exactly what we're looking at here, is it? We have not expanded anything. We sat back to where we said we were going to be, and we were involved in a peace process. The administration's argument is that military pressure has already created leverage and the negotiations are underway. In other words, the administration says we are moving from military coercion to diplomacy. Every once in a while, you have to slap them on the ass with the newspaper. That was the bombing the other day. That raises an entirely different constitutional question. Can Congress intervene in the middle of an active peace process? Because if negotiations are underway, Congress isn't simply voting on a war. And this is something that the Democrats accused Ronald Reagan of. They said that Reagan's people told the Iranians for the release of the hostages back in the old days, wait till we get in office and we'll give you a better deal if you return them. So that way he beats Carter. Same went back to Nixon. They said that Nixon held off the peace process so that he could get elected. He would take care of it in his time because Johnson was not going to. These are all historical things, and always the Democrats are the ones blaming the other side for problems. But they are also trying to stop peace processes in both of those cases, right? So if the negotiations are underway, Congress isn't simply voting on war, it may be voting on the leverage needed to secure peace. And that's a much murkier constitutional issue than the headlines or suggestion. And you should think about it this way. If Iranian negotiators look at the House vote and conclude that Trump's hands are becoming tied politically, which they saw with the English cutting off the shipping contracts for insurance, leaving those targets all bottled up for them there in the northern part of the strait, they took that as a Europe is not with the Americans, and they continued their bullshit. The Arabs are working with us to the extent that they can, but they're going to start to waver after that vote yesterday, which means there are going to be backdoor conversations between the Arab allies of ours and the Iranians, because the bully that was there is going to say, if you don't cut them off of all these places, I'm really going to give it to you when I get loose, right? So less likely to deal with us that way. If they believe Congress is reducing the president's options, why would they rush into an agreement? The standard peace process for an Arab is to stall. All negotiations is to stall. That isn't just a military question, it is a diplomatic one, and it may be a constitutional question as well that I think the president's people should be looking into right now. Because there's another irony. Even if this measure passes the Senate, it's going to face a presidential veto. And as I said, the Congress would need a two-thirds majority in both chambers to override it. Right now, they do not have those votes, which means many of the people casting these votes know there is a very good chance the revolution, right, never becomes law. And they are doing it to do it. So why are they casting the vote? And the supporters are going to say, we are doing it for principle. And critics will say it's politics. But what matters is foreign governors don't give a shit about our next election right now. Tehran doesn't care whether a congressional vote is symbolic. Jerusalem doesn't care whether it survives a veto. They care about what the vote says regarding America's future direction. And that is the danger. A symbolic vote in Washington can become a strategic signal overseas. Iran sees division, Israel sees uncertainty, and they are both arming up as we speak with contingency plans. And suddenly, a vote intended for domestic political consumption to get some crooked ass Democrat through the midterms is going to shape the calculations of foreign governments and the attack and defense plans that they have. This is real, which brings us back to the title of today's discussion, which is, if you see it on our print on Substack or at www.southfloridaconservative.com, is Congress trying to beat Trump, or are they trying to win the war? I suspect different members would answer the question differently. But I think if we look at it overall, there's another question they should be asking themselves, but they won't because they're political creatures. What happens if they're wrong? What happens if Iran survives, rebuilds, and resumes its pursuit of nuclear weapons? What happens if Israel concludes America is going to step back and going to start listening to all these Jew-hating Democrats? What happens if Jerusalem decides that it cannot afford to wait, which it has already said that it cannot afford to wait at different times? When the attacks occurred that started all this shit, you know, in Jerusalem, in Israel, I'm sorry, in general. Because when that day comes, Congress may discover that it did not prevent a future conflict. It merely transferred responsibility for dealing with Iran from Washington to Jerusalem, which honestly, if you've seen any newspapers over the last X amount of months or years of the conflict, they always say that we will do America's dirty work. They just have to let us do it. You know, the Middle East has a vote on this. Iran has a vote on this. Israel has a vote on this. If I were any of these Emiratis or whatever, and I've been sponsoring some flunky ass American politician, I would say, hey, I hope you guys can afford to eat ramen noodle for the rest of your lives, because I will not put another goddamn dollar into you for doing this. That's where this really has to come from. The guys that have been backing these idiots for so long have to start realizing, as I'm sure Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, all of them realize now, that it was probably not so smart to back these Democrats and a number of the Republicans too, because of their total out of control behavior when it comes to the president. If you are that much in a hate environment that you would jeopardize a nuclear attack, which is what you're looking at with these guys, either the Iranians will get that first bomb and throw it at Israel, or Israel will say it's enough and they will drop the one, or they have a couple, I think. I think they have four or five, but they're all small yields, but doesn't matter. It's a small country. And they start deciding to drop them, or they drop their dirty version of it to deny them access to the nuclear laboratory, which honestly, at this point, would have probably been a smart move on our part. Nobody lives there anyway. So, it is what it is. But don't for a minute think this has anything to do with Congress retaking its power. It has everything to do with Congress asserting that they have distinct disagreements with the President of the United States and that they are willing to jeopardize a peace process with a dangerous fucking country like Iran just to try to prove the point to whoever, themselves, obviously to the people who fund them. you know they weren't going to take us taking their, the American people are taking their money back from the mouths of these greedy bastard organizations that have been sponsored by the US government with our tax dollars. You don't think they were just going to lay down and say, oh, we stole $10 billion, that's enough? They can't stop once they start. It's just like any other crime. But that's enough of that nonsense. So that's where we stand today. If anything, Trump should turn around and say, fuck it, we're bombing everybody because I got to get it done before it goes to a vote in the Senate. This is also what can happen. Super turned up things, to be honest with you. And I've said it since the beginning, there are really no mines in the Strait of Hormuz, not really. We could be escorting those ships through. I think the president has gotten bad advice from somebody. It wouldn't be from a civilian. But we know that the intelligence, a couple of them leak like a fucking sieve. So it wouldn't be beyond them to give them a really vanilla, super cautious thing that the blockade is the way to go, when really just opening the Strait of Hormuz, which they can do pretty much now, could have done it weeks ago. The only thing was there was a couple elements in there that you couldn't totally fine tune because of Oman. But Oman will not be hostile, openly hostile. So yeah, you can open it. I will put the link to an article that is at the International Maritime Security website in there somewhere, that you can see that it's imminently doable. It should have been done, which gives you the wonder of who is the one who is not influencing the president's decision in the correct direction. And this has happened before. It's happened under every presidency, So we'll talk about that at a later date. Otherwise, have a good day and be safe out there.